And welcome to this webinar. Today we have literally all the shining stars of project management field, and all of them are podcasters. So today we're going to learn a lot about the podcasting business as well as project management in general as an industry. I am so happy to have all of you today, very grateful, people with tons of experience and great audiences that they have worked with for many years. So I am really curious to start today's webinar. My name is Anar Umurzakova. I am myself also a project management professional, project management consultant with over 13 years of experience. And last year I started Open School of Business with the mind that I would like to explore more about entrepreneurship topics as well as project management and other business topics. So that's how Open School of Business came to be. And today I just can't wait to start all of our speakers introducing themselves. So I would like first to pose a question asking you to introduce your podcast, your unique value proposition, how many years you've been doing it, what's your ideal customer and your audience, and of course your business model and the monetization strategy, because a lot of beginner podcasters are thinking about it from the start to be able to make the best out of their journey in the podcasting. Thank you.
Oh, now you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I unmuted myself. Sorry, I muted and then I unmuted. I just wanted to say that I'd like to start with Andy, just, with alphabetical order, and then we can move further, everyone introducing their podcast and what they do with it.
Yeah. So name is Andy Kaufman and host of the People and Projects podcast, and started in 2009 with zero vision. So I was interviewed on a podcast and I started talking to the guy and I'm like, so how do you do this? I think I could do that. And so absolutely zero thinking about unique value propositions or whatever you asked about there, Anar. So in the process since, the time since, we're episode 304 goes out this week. It's a lot of lessons along the way, but our vision has never been, and to this day, the podcast as a business necessarily. It is to supplement what we do. What we're doing, what we do is it's a speaking and training business and coaching business. So one of my mentors years ago said, marketing is like a baseball diamond. Actually, he asked me, do you know the difference between marketing and sales? And this is how lame I was at the time. I don't know if I could really articulate all that well, the difference. And so he drew a baseball diamond, and first base was awareness, second base was comfort, third base was needs analysis, and home was more along the lines of going for the sale. And to me, that was transformative because I needed to know the left side, or the first base and the second base side. So the podcast actually fills that. It's awareness and comfort. So the show is not about me. It's all about the guest, or I add some comments, but it's really about the guest. But it is to create a conversation that people can say, oh, maybe that is somebody we like to talk to more. So some podcasts focus heavily on project management, specific content, some not so much. And I mean, our content is geared towards project managers, but not about project management specific. So we're not talking about only project management topics. So we're going for, we had 4 of the top Thinkers 50 in the top 4 of the top 10 of that. And we're trying to take business thought leaders and taking their stuff and apply it to project managers, but we're not talking about critical path and PMOs and stuff like that, because we got a crowd of people right here that are like extraordinarily good at that. So
I see. Thank you so much for that, Andy. And I know that a lot of your podcasts are offering PDUs, which are very useful for project managers. And I'm wondering how many people like sign up for that from your podcast.
I would say from the survey, we survey the audience regularly, and I was expecting a lot higher number of people saying they're doing it for the PDUs. Quite frankly, I thought that's what we'd hear. It's actually a relatively small, like a quarter of the people or less are doing it for the PDUs. So the good news about PDUs is it can drive the listeners. And so if for the Open School of Business, is that what it's called? Open School of Business or Open Business School? Open School of Business?
Yeah,
okay.
It is Open School.
So anything that
Open School of Business.
So anything that can drive traffic to somebody who's an entrepreneur, like there's certifications drive business for us. So there's things, if there's a driving force, that can be a really good thing. But the vast majority of people tell us they're listening because they have real problems and they find that the content's good for that. But every one of us here knows that a lot of places that'll give you PDUs are just downright boring. And every podcast that's right here I've listened to, they're not boring PDUs. So you're not just like, oh, how do I get it? You can listen to any one of these podcasts and you'd be like, I actually enjoyed that.
Right. I love that about podcasting because it is the crossroads between entertainment and knowledge sharing and networking. And that's why I think I'd like to bring in Elise next. Because she is really a master of networking, especially in the space of women in project management. She has authored several books in collaboration with all the other women professionals, and I really absolutely admire that business model. Please, Elise, welcome. Please share about your podcast.
Hi, Anar, and everyone else. I feel like I know everyone else that's participating this morning, which is fantastic. So I started a podcast many years ago when I was first starting my business, and my then business coach was like, well, you need to be writing a blog post every week. And I'm like, oh, no way. I can talk, so let me podcast. And I think that was the right thing to do. And so what I have found, it was really tough in the beginning to get people to come on to the podcast and be interviewed because no one knew me. Who was this person from Brisbane, Australia? So, I'd be sending messages to people on LinkedIn and they'd be like, nah. But, eventually I got better at it. And so my podcast isn't about making money. A couple of years ago, I was looking around when I was starting the Celebrating Women in Project Management and noticed there was a real lack of women's voices in blog posts, events, podcasts. And I thought that it was important to provide a platform for women to be able to share their experiences and to give women more of a voice in the profession. And over time that has changed, and that is fantastic because now there's a lot more women sharing their insight and sharing their experiences and getting their voices heard, which is, I think, very important. And in actual fact, I have morphed my podcast into being, rather than being about project management, it's about future-proofing your career, and it's about having the skills that are necessary. So whenever I interview someone, it's always the same kind of 3 questions about how do we overcome a particular challenge? What can we do to improve ourselves? And the third thing is, what tips would you give people about doing X? And I wanted it to be very practical because sometimes you hear terms, and I'll take emotional intelligence as an example. We must have more emotional intelligence. Well, what does that mean? How can I how can I embrace that and not just be a buzzword? And for me personally, I find the podcast provides a lot more kudos, if you like, that whenever I'm talking to someone about doing different things, taking the Celebrating Women in Project Management event as an example, the podcast gives people more context and about me and what I do. And so I think that that's important. But I also think that it's a great resource for people that do want to future-proof their careers.
All right. And I think I'm just curious about what's the percentage of your listeners are women?
I don't know. No idea. It's too hard.
Okay.
It's too hard to measure.
Yeah, I see. Okay, we can move on towards other speakers. I think Joe must be the next one.
Yes.
Could you please share your journey and when you started and how you're doing today?
Yeah, we started the podcast Project Management Office Hours about 3 years ago, and really didn't have, well, like Andy, I didn't know what I was doing. It really was, I was new to Phoenix, and I needed a way to establish relationships within the business community. And the best way to do that, I thought, was invite project management directors on and just have a chat. And it's evolved over time, really, because the guests started telling stories. And what I realized was it really isn't about project management at all. It's the personal story, the journey that everybody's been on. And, you know, my last episode, I had Elizabeth Heron on. And as we were talking about mentoring, what really occurred to me, I had an aha moment, which I have almost on every episode, is that I'm now using these personally as mentoring episodes to hear from the experts in our industry about how they've been successful. And if I'm getting that out of it, then I know that the other listeners for the show are as well. So that's what I've tried to steer towards. Tell us your story. Share with everybody what you had to do to get where you've gotten. What are the challenges along the way? What have you learned? And what have you benefited from? And out of that exposure, we've been able to bring on Elise from Australia and folks from Canada and Germany and Spain and Honduras. Our next show, we have someone from India. Later, we've got one coming up from Zambia. It's a global community that we're in, and all of our stories, while unique, have a commonality to it with project management. So that's what we try to do. And I think it's helped me establish credibility within the industry, that I'm not in it for me, that I'm really trying to help the industry benefit by letting all of us share each other's stories. So that's kind of been the message, right? And that's the evolution of it, right? It certainly wasn't the way we started it, but I think it has grown itself to become that.
Yes, I think that's exactly why when I started my podcast, I really geared towards a very general title, and the title that would be open and about learning, because every person who comes on the show, on any of these podcasts that are, you know, present today, they all share a story. They all tell all the tips and all the lessons learned from their careers. So I think it's really amazing. And I'm really excited about the next podcast done by Kate and Kim. It's Project Management Happy Hour. And I like, because it's two hosts talking, and it's really informal. And I'm wondering, how was your start? And what are you doing in terms of your business model today? Because it seems like mostly the general thread is that people get into it, doing it for themselves and doing it for community. But also, I want to hear a story where there is a particular business model that our listeners could think about and evaluate, maybe use it in their podcasts.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's an honor to be among these podcasters that we respect a lot. As far as partnering, I think because I know I would have been touring by myself. And so I have Kate on with me.
Yeah.
Yes, that's all I have to say. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Kim reached out to me and said, hey, I've been doing a training course around the first 5 questions that a project manager needs to ask when they start a project. And I think I could turn that into a podcast. And I said, okay, what do you need me for? He said, because I'll be boring if you're not here with me. And so this is sort of the energy of our podcast. But he had a business plan when he came up with this, but we did start small. If you want to share more about that, Kim.
Yeah, we did. So I didn't. So I had a blog, and I'd written these 10,000 word blog posts about project management, and I had to recognize no one on earth is going to read my 10,000 word blog posts on project management. And I started writing those because I do a lot of coaching and mentoring for PM, and I would have the same question, the same problem. So I thought, well, why don't we just record some podcasts and just share those? And rather than trying to dive in and invest in this huge business model and all this, let's just do 5 podcasts and see if anybody other than us and our mothers listen to this. So we did 5 podcasts, and then there were like 3 or 4 people. I don't know. There weren't a whole lot, but there were a few people that listened to us, and we're like, we don't even know these people, and they're listening to us.
Yeah.
And I think all podcasters go through that. And so we had to figure out how are we going to pay for this, because there was a little bit of cost involved. And so since I was already a registered education provider with what I was doing, we thought, and I had friends who had they lost their certifications because they just didn't get around to doing their PDUs. And everybody struggles with that. Like, oh my gosh, I renew next month. What am I going to do? So we thought, well, why don't we just try to make it super easy to get PDUs? And what I did was we structure each podcast as like an online course, but you can listen to it. There's no pay. But if you want to actually get that PDU, and we will upload those for you, which is, the biggest pain there, we created a subscription model. Actually, before we did that, we said, well, is anybody going to buy these? So we went and found the cheapest online quiz taker you could do to see, is anybody even going to pay $1, $5 to do this? And so lo and behold, we had like 4 or 5 people paid $5 a quiz to go through an online class. There's a class version of our podcast. People paid for it. And they did it. So then we said, well, let's turn it into a subscription model. And that worked.
Yeah, and we keep thinking about how can we provide value to our listeners. You asked earlier about our value prop and target market, and we're really for the accidental project manager, somebody who like looked up one day and was like, oh my gosh, I guess I'm a project manager now. How did this happen to me? Somebody saved me. And so our format is casual and honest and frank talk about what it's like to try to get things done in the workplace. And there's a lot of great things that we can take from the PMBOK that help us with that. And then there's like what happens whenever rubber meets road and the PMBOK tries to live in a living, breathing company, and that's just not really how it works. So how do you really get through and get things done with all that to happen? And Kim and I share horror stories of big project failures, big project successes. We've obviously both had in a long career in project management. And we've seen that that's in general who comes to us, right? It's folks who are trying to not lose out on their cert, have an easy way to maintain their PDUs. And the other most engaged users we have are those who are like, please help me figure this out. I've just never done this before. I don't really have somebody to even learn from on the job. How can I get better at this?
Amazing. I really love your stories and the way you brand the whole PM happy hour. Even those cartoonish looking photos that you use for the art of the podcast. It's really nice. Huge fan. So, yeah.
Oh, I say thank you. Regarding the art for your listeners, so what we did was we wanted to find art, and we're not artists. So what we did was we actually went out to Upwork, and we just went out and found 5 or 6 people and said, hey, draw us a picture of this. And we got 5 responses and said, wow, this one is really good. And we built a partnership. So from building a business or doing a podcast, and that's how we found our audio editor, the same way, is just go out to Upwork, other place like that, find, put it out like audition tests, and you'll find out who responds and who responds well to your liking style.
Yeah, right. That's great. And I'm really happy that I got to meet all these podcasters. We have Kendall Lott with PM Point of View here today, and I met him at the Washington, D.C. chapter Congress. So it's like one of the stories where you meet person first and then you discover the podcast. So that's how it happened with Kendall. Please tell us your story about your podcast.
That's probably why I have a bad business model. You actually have to meet me to find out I have a podcast. Right? There's only so many people you can meet. Yeah, my background on this might be a little bit different than others. I'm probably the NPR of the podcasters here. I have no business model. I pay a fortune to do it, and it came out of a service orientation. And in fact, I've been accused of having a voice that only NPR could hire. And someone recently told me, I got a comment like, I just love your podcast. I literally met her while I'm traveling around out west out here. And her comment was, it's like listening to This American Life, but for project managers. So I was like, that's good. Yes, that's good.
That's a compliment.
So it's a different kind of approach in a sense. My journey came out of the fact that I was the president or chair of the Washington, D.C. chapter of PMI. So I'm coming out of the association side, where we were struggling with how can we, frankly, get out of the baby boomer mentality into a more modern mentality about sharing the ideas. So another difference that I have with maybe some of what I'm hearing from here is that mine is actually not about the stories of the people. So if you're into the stories of the people in career, that's probably not the podcast you want to listen to. Mine is around the ideas of project management and why they matter, which is why I made it PM Point of View. So I was trying to get the chapter to do something besides white cloth dinners, rubber chicken, cheesecake, and writing a blog. They had some other ideas that they were doing. I was like, why don't we do podcasts? Everybody in the board thought it was an amazing idea, and then they all stared at their shoes. And I was like, okay, I run a business, so I might as well just do this because you got to take action, and I could afford to do it. I have an in-house editor, who's a documentarian and has a background in music, Mary Flannery, and she's become an expert in project management because she's listened to 400 hours of raw feed that we edit. We edit in 3 milestones typically. I occasionally have a roundtable format, but generally I have 3 stories that help support some idea in project management, whether it's agile or design thinking or something like that. So I take an idea that typically ties to project management, program management, might be broadly leadership. And I get some experts lined up on that, and I get to edit them in with a music bed behind it. So that's why it has that format. I started with a shorter format. I went to longer so we could help generate the PDUs for people, because that's the coin in trade if you're coming out of a PMI experience, right? Not as profession, but as more of the association in the push on that. So I think it's highly edited. So we typically take quite a bit of feed and edit it down and get that organized around people that way. But it tends to be around the ideas of that. We've had I started in April 2014, or May might have been my first one. We just published our 79th one today. About 65 of them are an hour long. I run about, it depends, but I'm probably averaging only about 2,000 downloads a month of the new one. I tend to run about up to 7,000 total downloads per month. I've got about 375,000 downloads so far. It doesn't cost anything. I pay for the editor's time, and I pay for all my arrangements to go do all the interviews and things like that. So for me, it's come from a push on getting the idea of project management out, because it came from my chairmanship, right? How do we promote project management, right? I was in the PMI world. So I'm trying to promote project management. And that's why it started as PM Point of View, because my first ones were around wedding planning, a vintner, a politician who ran a campaign in Chicago. Like, how is what you do look like a project? And they'll often tell me, someone talk about the accidental project manager, they'll tell me, well, I don't know anything about project management. I run a campaign, or I make wine. And I'm like, no, I'll handle the project management side. Like, I'll put all those words in. You tell me what you do. because I think what we're learning here is how scope is different when this happens, or risk is viewed as differently when this happens.
Right.
So that's why I've enjoyed doing it.
It sounds like you're also giving consulting at the spot, and I think it's really great. And definitely you have a unique value proposition that is very different from a lot of us here, and thank you for that. I think we do need champions like you for the project management community, because a lot of projects sometimes go undervalued, and they're not seen as the key function in corporate world. So I think this really, really valuable work you're doing for the whole community. I want to continue our conversation by talking about the challenges that you have currently, because I think we kind of agreed that a lot of the challenges in the beginning were to, you know, find the guests, find your first listeners, to really wrap your head around the business model. And it seems like it's still a challenge that we might be able to solve in the future more aggressively. But I want to see your point of view, like what kind of new things you started coming up with to boost listenership, or to find more engaging topics. What are your strategies? How are you dealing with your challenges right now? And we can start with Andy again.
Yeah, you know, every once in a while you hear somebody in a corporate environment, they go, let's start a newsletter, or let's start a fill in the blank. And it sure seems like a really good idea, right? And the easiest thing, and we can debate this, because sometimes it's hard to start a project, but sometimes it's the easiest thing to start a podcast. I don't exaggerate, but it's at least monthly, and sometimes more often, or someone go, hey, you know, I want to start a podcast. And so I'm like, go for it. But the easiest thing to do is to start it. The most difficult thing early on was like, how do we keep this thing going in terms of, I mean, you can put out content, but how does it not get watered down, and how does it not get rushed, and how does it, you know, how does it keep getting better, you know, and things like that. So I'm quite sure that my first episode in 2009 was listened to my parents, maybe, you know, and it's quite different now. I hear from podcast listeners almost every day from around the world, but it's one of those things of the challenge early on was, what's the format that's best? What works? Is it too long? Is it too short? The quality was, I mean, there's always opportunity to get better quality, but the quality was terrible. But it was the hardest thing to me was, how can I get what I think are interesting people and just keep it going with even more interesting people and more interesting guests, and, you know, more value. And then once I started realizing these authors are dying for publicity. So the problem actually isn't getting guests. The issue is I've made asks that I never thought they'd say yes. And they're like, yes, when can we talk? So what you can realize is that people are out there and willing to talk. So the ask is just all you need to make. But then it was like, well, the listeners, and, you know, podcasts were not that big of a deal in 2009. And so I had to, some people are like, well, what is that? And so basically growing listeners, that's not an issue now. In fact, the numbers are pretty amazing just in the last year, from, I think it was 700,000, something like that, active podcasts on Apple Podcasts. I think it was only a year ago, to almost doubled within the last year. So,
Right.
So that'll get to current challenges about listeners, but it's one of those things. Back then it was like, how do I develop a listener base? And what I found was as soon as I really started leveraging LinkedIn, you know, for us, Twitter is nothing. Facebook is nothing. Everything is LinkedIn. And so once we started aggressively using LinkedIn to get episodes out and connect with people, things skyrocketed. That's when we started getting advertisers approaching us. And everything changed when we found ways to leverage social media.
All right. I remember one of those early days. I really enjoyed the short videos that you were doing with subtitles.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really worked to promote, and they were short and sweet. They were really great.
Thank you.
Who would like to share next? I think Elise is on our list of person right after Andy.
So kind of a similar story to Andy's about, I have a closed Facebook group and they're not really that interested in the podcast. It's got a different flavor, but LinkedIn is definitely the best way to get the message out about the podcast and to engage people. You know, as with Andy, the original situation was that it was quite difficult to get guests, but it has got easier. And being in Australia, it's a bit different because of the time zone, and
That's correct.
you know, trying to sync up time zones. And so the best thing I ever did was invest in a calendar where people could pick their own times, and we could work it out that way, because before it was just like to and froing all the time, and you know, it was doing my head in. You know, but that's just some of the mechanics of, you know, scheduling and getting it together. And you know, as for the future, you know, there are so many people doing really interesting things, and it's great to be able to provide, you know, seasoned professionals with opportunities to share their knowledge and to, you know, give that opportunity. But it's also great to provide a platform where your guests, my guests, get the opportunity to do it for the first time, and as you know, as a learning experience, and to push themselves out a bit more. But you know, the challenge is always about trying to you know, maintain what's important for me as the host and what message I'm trying to get out. And you know, as I grow and evolve, that message is changing, and so it's good to see the podcast changing as well.
Yes, I noticed that you changed the title from the Fix Your Project Chaos into Age-Defying Careers, and it's great because it's like in line with your book, right?
Yeah, and into future-proof your career, because you know, at the end of the day, we all want to have careers as long as we need. And you know, instead of talking about, you know, esoteric fluffy stuff, it is about the how-to, and that's the message that I'm continuing to work on, and to give people information that they can practically use, practical tips.
All right, great. Thank you, Elise. And I think, Joe, you mentioned that you started it to expand your network in Phoenix when you were new there. So after you established that, what kind of other challenges you saw?
Yeah, and I think we're a little bit different than possibly every other podcast in our industry, because we're a live radio show. So we record the radio show and release it as a podcast, but while we're doing that recording, we don't get the chance to go back and make edits, correct the blunders, work with the guests to clean things up. So it's live, and that has its own challenges, right? We had Colin Ellis on from Australia, and the internet went down. So we lost our guest live on air. What do you do when that happens? You know, the stretch, right? You know, so Colin's been on 2 episodes.
Colin will just yell louder and you'll hear it.
Right. So we have those challenges. And what I wanted to do was also show that the project management leaders in Phoenix could have conversations with project management leaders from anywhere in the world. So the first shows that we did, the first probably 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, was a local guest in studio and a national or international guest remote. And we would just have a conversation, and it let the people in Phoenix know we're not a second-class project management community, right? We belong. I see Derek Brownell is here on the audience, and he was on with Andy, right? So we had Derek local in studio, and Andy Kaufman was on remote. Now, as we've evolved into the 3rd year, and with COVID hitting us, we couldn't really bring the Phoenix people into the studio. So we've gone just single guest anywhere in the world that they're located. So lots of UK guests, Canada, again, Zambia, India, and more. But the challenge again is, how do you then take a guest in India and be on live radio, right? Because when our show records, it's 11:30 p.m. in India, right? So we had to alter the show timing. So it's that. And then this year we just recently brought on a show producer. Having done this for 3 years now, I want to do the show, but I don't want to build the show, right? The getting the guests, the post-production edits, the social media posts, that's a lot of work. And again, I'm not doing it to draw revenue. We get some listeners who enjoy what we do and what we talk about. So we've won business deals that started with an introduction from the radio show. But that's not the purpose, right? So for me, I had to find a way to bring on help to take care of the operations of the show, and I can show up and have the chat with the guests.
Right. Thank you. I'm also very curious, since you're the only one among us who works on the radio. How did you stumble upon the radio, or you worked there before? And also tell us, what are the advantages of having the show on the air, and maybe the sort of how-to if you wanted to get on the radio. I think that's definitely gonna increase your listenership, but maybe we could all benefit from your advice in that sense of how do you get to that point.
We got approached by the station and said, hey, would you be willing to do a project management radio show? And I said, no, I'm a project management consultant. I'm not a radio person. I have a face for radio, but so ultimately I said, what the heck?
No, you have a voice for radio, come on.
I'll do one show like everybody else, right? I'll do one show and we'll see if anybody listens. 3 years later, right, we're over 20 million plays and downloads. So people are listening. The challenge is you have to deal with live events, right? When Elise was on, she was on our show, there were birds chirping in the background the entire show. And our guest from Germany, it was like a James Bond film, right? There was those police sirens going in the background. And I love that because it shows we're real people. Yeah. We have to react to real life circumstances. You know, we don't get a chance to hit pause, let the siren go by, and then continue the conversation. That's real life. And I love a live show creates a situation where we as project managers have to think and react on the fly. And that live show gives us that same sort of sense. So it's definitely a challenge, but I think that the benefit is that not that any of the podcasts aren't real, but we're not scripted, right? We're not edited. It is what it is. Whatever you get on the show is what you get.
Right, and I'm still not gonna.
Can I make a comment on the Joe's?
Sure.
Because so Joe said it's networking, and I live in the Phoenix area, the same as Joe, and I have to speak to just how effective Joe's approach has been. I got to tell you, everybody I speak with in the PMO in the Phoenix market, they know PMO Joe. He's done an amazing job. Everybody in the Phoenix area that I talk to, like, oh, I know PMO Joe, I know him. So I mean, congrats to Joe, and he's right. It's done a great job of networking for him. So congrats.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.
Yes, I think I can only wish for everyone to get approached by the radios. So good luck with that. And I want to bring in Project Management Happy Hour people, Kate and Kim, just to continue. What were your challenges, and what are the challenges now that, you know, maybe in growing your subscription, have you done anything in that direction?
Kate, do you want to start?
I mean, I think our biggest challenge is, I don't know how many folks here do their podcast and associated business with the podcast full time, but Kim and I both have full-time jobs in association with doing this podcast. I know we had a light year in 2019 just because we were both so slammed with our day jobs, that we couldn't keep up with the work that the podcast takes. It doesn't take a ton of work, but sometimes when I'm having an exhausted day, I describe it as having like 1.5 full-time jobs by having the amount of work that goes into this. Writing an episode takes time, editing an episode or like going into the feedback, making sure we get the, intros and outros correct, that we coordinate with the guests, that we do our pre-work, like that all takes time. And so one of our biggest challenges has been finding the time. And I'm grateful for COVID in this instance for giving me time back to be able to focus on the podcast, which I'll speak to here. And I think with that lapse in our output, right, I think we saw a little bit less engagement from our users. They were so eager to hear from us when we came back, which was also exciting. So if anybody here is going through like, I'm trying, but I'm struggling, like know that if you have a good thing, that will continue if you put content back out in the world. But I think that's our biggest challenge. Kim, I'll let you add whatever else you want to add here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the thing about going with a subscription model for a small part of our listener base to finance it is your listeners are making your customers are making a commitment, a financial commitment. So it's a recurring payment, or they paid in advance for the year, which is great because it helps stabilize your revenue stream and just makes it easier to run the business. The flip side of that is the commitment you now have to make that in giving that membership or the subscription value is you've committed a certain value to give back to your subscribers on a regular basis, and so you can't really get out of it. And so it's just it can be tough sometimes, projects, the ebb and flow, and sometimes you get really busy, but you have a responsibility to those listeners and those subscribers to keep up the service, and that can be really challenging sometimes.
Yeah. And I see a question in the chat on, and I'll just speak for PM Happy Hour about if we've ever had to pay for guests. We've never paid for a guest, and I just see some heads shaking, right? It's for many guests, it's free publicity, right, to be on our podcast. Hopefully they have a large enough following that they'll share your podcast with their audience, whether that's just people who like them and they're popular on LinkedIn, or maybe they're part of a larger organization and it's like a partnership, but we've not paid for guests at this point in time. And I don't think we ever would. That doesn't seem to be a winning strategy.
Right. I would like to also bring in Kendall and say that you probably have a really a lot of time that you put in, like you said, into, because there are little documentaries when you do your stories and the editing and everything. So how much time do you really put in?
We put in quite a bit. It's probably a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 hours to each hour of effort, separate from some of the just operational time of phone calls and emails and resyncing everything. I like Elise's point about just put up a calendar. I wouldn't deal with it. As I think about it, listening to what you're saying, I think I like a lot about interesting. Oh, I have some hammering going on here.
That's all right.
Liveness happening right here. I like the idea. First of all, I'd come up with a twist to mine because I wanted to make some changes. I was thinking PM Happy Hour, it's taken. So can't do that one. But just live. Now mine are done we don't do a lot of, we do editing in the sense of just reducing stuff. I don't do a lot of changing around. We don't ever retake anything. Very rarely has anyone ever said anything. In fact, what I have found with my guests is by telling them that it's edited, it actually relaxes them, because when we don't, they're like, oh, I can't say anything stupid, so I won't say anything. And a lot of my first guests were government people, and it turns out they're wonderful. But by saying, look, we're not going to let anything bad happen here. And so so a couple of things. I didn't have a good business model to start with. I don't have a good direction in that sense. I like Joe's point about I came out to network and now I got 20 million downloads. Everybody knows me in Phoenix. I'm networked. I have a subscription model. I can look at the dollars to say how this works, for example, that you two have discussed. I don't have a good model for that, and I would suggest someone have a purpose. Mine was to get the message out really around PMI and driving out how chapters could be more involved. I have found that chapters have not picked up the burden of that, and I even offered to do it for them in many cases. So I think that was where I wanted to come from. My goal now was to think of a smaller form. I'm thinking about wanting to shift it a little bit, or quite a bit, because it does take so much of an effort. You are right, they're kind of almost documentary they're kind of long, and I've not been able to recoup any value in any real feedback way from it, I think. And I'd like to do more of that, but it was meant to be educational. Again, I was PBS, I was NPR, right? Public broadcasting, right? It was really coming out of my service side. You mentioned about how it was a job on top of your job. For me, it was a job on top of my full-time volunteer job, on top of my running a company job. And so I really needed help from my editor or producer to really make it happen. Otherwise, I was going to be stranded. So I would like to find the model that goes a little short. I'd like to emphasize more for myself now, the synthesis of what I've heard and just put it out there more directly. Is where I'm thinking of going. But all in all, I love the live model. Is a great one. I would tell everyone that. I guess there needs to be enough room for a little bit of everything. Sometimes I listen to the radio, and sometimes I listen to Radio Lab. I listen to a prepared narrative of some sort. So one other thing I've done, I would suggest to your people, everybody comes on as I did. You ask, well, what kinds of questions you're gonna ask? Like, what is the scope? We do a scoping call, which shouldn't surprise any project manager that I'm going to do a scoping call before I let you go on the air, right? We're going to know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the second part is I give them questions, but to be fair, and part of what people have noted that they've liked is I don't generally ask the questions I just told them I was going to ask them. So hence, if you get asked to be a guest on my show, I'm going to tell you 5 questions. I'm going to ask 2 of them, and then I'm going to ask you a bunch of stuff that's not that. And then that's where all the goodness comes out. So you can be scripted. It's not scripted, it is edited, but it's not scripted. And so we were able to kind of get people to be engaged. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but the one feedback that I do get, and I get fairly commonly, I'd say about a third of the time now, is the guest says, "You made me sound so smart." And I'm like, well, no, you are that smart, and I didn't do anything but ask you to tell me what you meant, right? But people are very happy to hear that their idea came across. And for me, presumably my audience likes that, but for me, that's valuable to me, that my guests are like, I sounded like I knew what I was up to, like it was meaningful. And so it's helpful when it's not a professional speaker, that it's somebody who's just written their first book, or just getting into blogging, or just did a really cool project and no one's asked them about it. So I have found that to be personally enchanting.
Yes, I think it's really amazing because you're probably a really good conversationalist, and you can bring out the best in people while they're talking about it, and intuitive most likely, so that you know what kind of questions would spark the joy and spark the passion in a person and get them talking. And I probably wouldn't be mistaken if I say that it's true for all the podcasters that are today here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interested in talking to people in general. So these are all the people who love people and love talking. So, but I really do appreciate like the way you're doing your podcast as a documentary, because you put in more time, therefore more value. And I don't know, have you thought about like PMI chapter, either sponsoring some part of it, like your editing cost or whatnot? Because, you know, you are doing a lot of things that are specifically PM related and promoting the idea of PM.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And in fact, I have to say, PMI WDC has been a sponsor the whole time in the sense of making sure I had an outlet. As people know, it's one of the larger chapters and probably still the largest chapter in the world. So it has a huge throat reach. And so it's very nice that I have that outlet, and they have sponsored in that way. I will also give a shout out to a real powerful partner that we have had that has also provided some money, because we're in a synergy, is the University of Maryland's Project Center for Excellence with John Cable, who's a bigwig in PMI land, and runs a whole graduate degree out of the engineering school there. And so what's happened is I am able to work with him and some of the work he does with project managers to recast it in a new form, to take their presentations and recapitulate. We just had one today that came out where I'm able to take what they've done as presentations, think TED Talks style, TED Talks podcast, where it's already recorded and then you reflect on it. And so I have been able to work with that. And I think that's another thing for people to look at as natural partners. Somebody talked about LinkedIn. I think that's a great professional networking thing. Another option to consider for both guest ideas and some sort of impact might be around universities or large corporation that might want to support you. But the university, I found that to be, they're also dedicated to the sharing of knowledge aspect that was kind of my one sort of business model, but my thrust. So I was able to sync with him. So I would invite people coming into the field to look where they have a natural alignment. Your local network of PMs or women in project management, where there's a natural alignment to an audience that you want to get to and a potential partner that way. So I need to do more there. That's how I enjoyed it.
Great, thank you so much for that. I think it's really, really helpful. And the time is coming up soon, so I just wanted to ask a quick question. It's more like a quiz questions from all of you. What kind of software do you use to distribute your podcast, and anything else technically you use, like a software to do, social media or other things that you do around your podcast? Andy?
We edit in Adobe Audition, host on Libsyn, use Headliner for videos and Adobe Premiere, and all kinds of different sites for the music and things like that. But I'd say that's primarily on the software side, those tools.
Yeah. I'm mostly interested about the distribution, like you use Libsyn, that's great. I use Anchor, for example, and it's free. I like that about that. Okay, anyone else? Joe, well, you're obviously on radio. And then what the other things you use?
Yeah, we distribute also on Spreaker to get it out to the different platforms. We've hired a firm out of the Philippines to do our audio and video edits to get snippets built for social media posts. And then this radio station, they have the master copy that they cut up and provide editing to that as well. And then we hand the raw file to each guest, right? So they have the ability to go out and use that as well. So we're creating Creative Commons content that allows them to use that audio file, and now Zoom, because we're doing video on each Zoom file, that they can use any way they want as well.
Kate and Kim?
We record locally. I'm on a Mac, so I use GarageBand, and Kate, I think you use Audacity, right? Free download. Yeah. So we record them, and then we get them over to our editor that we found through Upwork Service. And we've been working with him for a long time, and he puts it all together for us. And then, like Andy, we use Libsyn. It's stupid simple and just gets it out there everywhere. So we just put it out there, and boom, it's done. And then we go and do a little manual marketing here and there, and that's it for us.
All right. Is that Liz with Kendall?
So one of the best things I've started using is Squadcast to record. And I was using Skype, which has gone away, but it was problematic because people weren't on Skype. And I felt the quality through Zoom wasn't that great. So Squadcast is a great way to also, because it's got video going at the same time, you can have a much more engaging conversation with people. And then at the end, it brings it both together and creates a WAV file for me. So that's really good. I outsource my, I edit because I'm a bit anal about it. But over the years, I edit less than what I used to edit in the beginning. And now it's a bit more free form. But I have someone that cleans up the file and puts the intros and outros, and I've outsourced the show notes and the distribution. I still distribute. I use Castos to host my podcast because it hooks in with my WordPress website, so it all hooks in together, and someone looks after getting all that published.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a good one. I haven't heard about the Squadcast, right? That's what it's called. Okay, great.
I'm more like the wartime correspondent. You guys are so sophisticated. So I run around with like a handheld thing. I put up tripods. Sometimes I'll put up, if I have a round table, I'll put up 4 or 5 of them simultaneously. My editor, syncs them all up and cuts and pastes them. I've had people actually record on their phones and send me the file as I'm recording over Skype or Zoom. I use Skype. It got worse. My whole company's moved to Teams now. So I thought for people, although I prefer what all you guys are doing, in fact, I'm strictly audio. So nobody had to ever get ready for video. And the reason I did that, again, for your listeners, is that video adds complication by a magnitude. You ain't lived till you tried to edit video, and editing audio is nothing, relatively speaking. The other thing is funny, Elise, you just said, I've been editing less, because you were really kind about it, and you're like, oh, because we're more casual now. I'm trying to help my editor edit less by actually putting more effort into structuring the conversation so it's not all over the place. So that we did a roundtable recently where she just loved it because I actually had the questions kind of in order, and I did a roundtable like you're doing now. And she's like, oh yeah, I just cut out a couple little pieces. Boom, we had an hour because you only did an hour and 8 minutes, got rid of 8 minutes, threw in some music, and we were go. And we're editing less, but that's because I'm supposed to be working more, less casual. So it's kind of funny, but we use Libsyn. She uses Avid. She came out of the Mac world originally, I believe it was. And so we're using some older stuff that way. And we use some Audacity as well for some quality control, for smoothing out channels and stuff, sometimes with my CIO who's recording. But we only take the audio feed. We don't do video. And so that's an easier way for some of your podcasters maybe to get in, is to think audio. It's a magnitude less difficult.
Yeah, I want to share a story when you're saying about the video and audio, because when I started my podcast last year, I interviewed 10 people, and I was going to edit all and publish it all so that I have some kind of, all the episodes, it's not just one episode. So I started video editing. And I realized that is so much work. I spent like almost a month doing it. And then I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to publish as soon as possible in audio. And now with COVID, a lot of people do say that they use less audio podcasting, that they don't listen as much, and they love seeing something on the screen, some action. So like I just post unedited things on YouTube. And it's kind of fun because it's completely unedited and people can really see all the flaws and all the little stumbling and rumbling. It might not be super to the standard that I want it to be, but for the purpose of, if people are watching it for entertainment, it serves the purpose. And I do the more edited one on the podcasting websites that I have my own website, the openschoolofbusiness.com, and I use Anchor to get it all out to all the platforms. And I really would like to work more on the Apple podcasting to get more ratings and reviews there, and to start becoming more interactive audience. And this is kind of the thing that I want to do for the future. I want to say thank you to all of you. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation today.